My name's Sue Monckton-Rickett and my husband Chris Monckton-Rickett. We are both Registered Accredited Counsellors with the Association of Christian Counsellors, and I'm the chair of ACC, the Association of Christian Counsellors. Our normal roles at Spring Harvest would be to be leading the pastoral team, and often we have spoken and led pastoral seminars. And so we'd like to welcome you to Spring Harvest at Home and to this seminar that we're going to be doing on relationships and conflict. We'd like to welcome you into our home, which is where we're recording this from, and also hopefully you can welcome us into your homes where you're listening to and enjoying Spring Harvest resources. So we're going to look at relationships and conflicts. And we thought that was quite relevant at this time because we're all having to get to learn to relate to each other in very different ways. Some of us are finding actually that we're at great distance from people that we would normally be in relationship with and see on a regular basis. Some of us are having to live in very confined spaces with people that perhaps we wouldn't spend as much time with. We're spending 24 hours a day with people that normally may be out at work or school or volunteering in some way. And we're having to learn to have children at home all day long. Parents are having to learn how to work from home, and often without any real external outlets for ourselves or the other members of our family. And that can all place stress on our relationships. If we think about at Christmas time, we all know that we talk of families having heightened stress just from the fact that we have to be with each other. But that's for a very limited period of time. And what we're in, the situation we're in at the moment, we don't know how long that will be for. We know that when people are coming towards retirement or starting with retirement, they often feel that suddenly having to be with their partner for all day long is stressful. But again, often that's coming at the end of a time that's been planned, and many people have already know that they're going to take up particular hobbies. But the change that we're in now has been very sudden, and we can't plan for things, and many of the things that we might do as hobbies or external things, we can't actually do at the moment. And we're having to deal with these changes in relationships in a time of heightened uncertainty, anxiety and stress. And also in that kind of situation we're living in now, the normal everyday stresses of life can be magnified and exasperated. So we're going to spend some time just looking at how do we keep our relationships healthy, what's important in doing that, and also what contributes to conflict in relationships and how we might try to deal with those conflicts. So what makes for healthy relationships? We're going to start by thinking about how we value and understand our differences. We may all be members of one family, but within that we each have our own personality. We may be very different, and also we've all got our own personal history that shaped us. So we're one family, but we're all very different within that one family. For us to be able to accept, to understand and to value the difference of someone else, we need to first be able to accept, understand and value who we are. For us to be able to embrace difference in others, we need to be secure in who we are. And we need to not be trying to always be someone else. We need to value ourselves and accept ourselves as we are and for who we are. Our personalities and our history will impact many things in the way that we are and our being with each other. It will affect things about how we think, how we process information, how we make decisions, how we relate to each other and show emotions, how we approach and deal with different circumstances and different changes that happen. how we relax, what we enjoy, what makes us feel good. And differences, whether we like it or not, will mean that we actually naturally get on better with some people in our families than we do with others. And that's just a natural reaction. It's just the fact that we will naturally get along better with people. But if we can understand our differences, we can better understand each other. And we may be able to better understand and accept each other's strengths and weaknesses. We may be able to live and cooperate and work better with each other and more effectively. We may be able to work out how our gifts, our qualities, our skills can be used in the best way for us as individuals, but also for the whole, for the family working together. And we may be able to better understand what makes each of us angry, anxious, happy, relaxed. And in doing so, as we can understand that, we may be able to understand better how we can support each other in these circumstances and generally in family life. If we can value each other's differences, we can each be real. We can feel that we don't have to be like someone else or live up to someone else's expectations. Accepting and valuing difference involves not expecting everyone else to think, feel, react, decide, behave as we do. But equally, it also involves us not expecting ourselves to think, feel, react, decide, behave as others do. And that leads us on to expectations. We all have expectations. Some of those expectations are very realistic and some of them are very unrealistic. We have expectations of God. We have expectations of ourselves, of others, and of our relationships. People can feel that too much is expected of them, and some of us put too much expectation upon ourselves. People can feel that others expect too little of them, that they're not valued, that their skills are not recognised, that what they have to give isn't acknowledged well enough. We can place expectations on other people for them to change. We don't allow them to be who they are. We can place expectations on ourselves of how we're meant to change, how we're meant to behave to please others. And so we don't allow ourselves or other people to be real. Being real, accepting people as they really are, without a list of expectations, being real and accepting ourselves as we really are, without a list of expectations, is the only way that we can feel and we can model unconditional love.
I'd like to begin by talking about communication. We communicate with each other in many, many different ways. Words in somewhere are just the outer thing, but we pick up the cues, and most forms of communication, inverted commas, are going on below the radar. And maybe we perceive things correctly, but very often we don't. It leads me on to start with perhaps some of the laws of communication. If communication can fail, it will. If a message can be understood in different ways, it will be understood in the way that does the most harm. There is always somebody else who knows better than you what you meant to say, or indeed what you think. Don't you just love them? And a vacuum with no communication has to be filled. It absolutely has to be filled. But usually with rumour, speculation, and inaccuracy. And I know that's slightly humorous, some of that, but most modern conversations in this age of technology and weird and wonderful ways we can communicate with each other are being described as dialogues of the deaf because we don't listen. Some courses will teach that accepting in exchanging factual information, emails is about the worst form of communication in existence because you've just got the bare words and there's no feelings with it. There's no sense of the relationship with it. I want to talk a little bit about effective communication. We're not going to in depth on body language and all that, but just the basics of listening and speaking. Some of the things to be aware of. It's not just what we say, but how we say it. It's not just what the other person audibly hears or what we intend them to hear, but what they perceive, what they unconsciously hear. It may have nothing to do with us whatsoever. It's not just how the other person reacts, but how we expect them to react, and then how we react to that. And this is important, but how our own fears, prejudices, experiences, good, bad, or indifferent of life, affect our current relationships and our ability to communicate. If we're not careful, we will project all those things onto others. And I'll say a little more about that in a minute. And seeing the differences between right and wrong on the one hand, and just my way of doing it on the other. And as Christians, not to walk into the trap, and it is a trap, of this is how God does it with me, that's God's way, any other way is wrong. Well, God deals with us as individuals. We are very different personalities here. For instance, Sue over here is very outgoing, naturally extroverted, strongly extroverted person. So being cooped up in total self-isolation would be something of a struggle. I'm the other extreme. I'm a natural introvert. So it's at the moment, basically in certain circumstances, an inconvenience. And we're both fairly healthy and we are keeping ourselves here. But it's just a different way. The current situation affects some people more than others. Part of effective communication is deliberately setting aside time to discuss issues and not burying them. Because if we do bury them, they won't go away. They will come back, they will jump out and they will get us again and again and again until we do face them. And genuinely trying to understand the other person, which takes a degree of willingness. So what are the main factors in having a healthy relationship? One of the main things is about our own sense of personal security in who we are. This largely comes through our development, how we grow up, and through anybody or nobody's fault, we may not have got the sense of security we're designed to have. Whether we're Christians or not, that's not the point. But the healthier, the more secure we are in ourselves, the more likely, we can't be exact on this, but the more likely we are to form healthy relationships, maintain healthy relationships, and manage stress and conflict with a bit less stress and conflict, should we say. The more insecure we are, the more, particularly in the current circumstances of excess stress, the more difficult we may find relationships. And the sad truth is on this, like tends to attract like on this. So we take our insecurities into our relationships. Doesn't mean they can't still work or they're terrible, but it just makes things a bit harder. I mentioned just now about the word about projecting. The word projection's a word out of therapy land. And projection is There's a couple of forms. One in particular I want to talk about tonight is a form of defence mechanism that we operate, in which we can, and largely unconsciously, this is the point, we don't really know we're doing it, deny some aspect of our own behaviour or our own attitude, so we don't want to face them or we hate ourselves for having them, and we displace them or project them onto the other person or some other person we are perhaps relating to or discussing or we come across when we feel threatened. We accuse everyone else or someone else of behaving, thinking or feeling in the ways that we do ourselves but we deny within ourselves. And a common form of this, and it's one of the psychological mechanisms that can damage and make conflict more likely and damages in relationships, because, for instance, as an example, when an individual threatened by their own angry feelings or sense of injustice or whatever accuses another, often somebody in authority, of harbouring hostile thoughts towards them, and blame is placed on the outside force, the government, society, the neighbours, the pastoral carer, the counsellor, the church, whoever. Sometimes as Christians we get the idea that certain emotions or feelings are wrong, so we push them down, and again, they won't go away. It was just best to acknowledge them. Another very common sort of psychological mechanism that goes on with this is something called transference. And when we come to deal with conflict, this is truly serious, because what I'm about to explain is the underlying trigger for most conflict. Best define this, it's the process of responding to someone or something as if they were someone or something else. And again, we may not know we're doing it. We may not understand why we're doing it. Let's reflect for a moment, wherever we all are. Do you sometimes find somebody, for some reason you can't explain, says something, does something, and your reaction is out of all proportion for you? All proportion. It's maybe shocked. And you think, why did I do that? Why did I say that? I actually quite like them, really. Well, that's something like this that's going on. It's a reaction out of our pasts. I'm going to give you an example now. This is something we use as an example on some pastoral care training, and also looking at conflicts in churches, which are sadly are not exactly unknown. So this isn't about a relationship at home, but this is, as we say, a conversation that's going on between a vicar and a worship leader called Jonathan. So the vicar perfectly innocently decides on the music and the worship for the next service on the Sunday. Just says perfectly innocently, Jonathan, I'm not sure about using the music group this Sunday. Perhaps we ought to have the organ and a more traditional form of worship this week. What Jonathan unconsciously hears or thinks: you don't think I'm good enough. I'll never be good enough. I've never been good enough. You're always having a go at me. Just like my dad. He never thought I was good enough. I thought you were meant to love me. That's what's going on internally. Jonathan's immediate reaction: well, if you don't think I'm good enough, I won't bother playing at all. One shocked vicar jumps back. What is heard or thought by the vicar inside? These are just some of the reactions that could be going on. I've upset him. I'm not meant to do that. I'm meant to be loving. I'm the vicar. Perhaps my mother was right. I always get it wrong, and I'll always get it wrong. Oh, I must make a success of this. Or maybe a different reaction, maybe just another angry reaction. Now, at this point, the vicar has a choice. If he can step back and take a few deep breaths. Now, one, he can decide not to do that, but have to keep the peace at all costs. So he gives in. Well, maybe you're right, Jonathan. Maybe you're right. Again, he's acting out of his own past. Or he gets angry because the sense of failure that he has grown up with has surfaced again, acting from the past. Or he addresses the real issue and challenges his own and Jonathan's behaviour, acting in the present under a degree of self-control. Now, we can only guess that if he acts from the past, Jonathan then reacts from his past, and so it just escalates and escalates. And the point about this is it's got absolutely nothing to do with the real issue that's behind this. And in all conflict, unless the underlying issues are acknowledged and addressed, the conflict and the destructive behaviour will just simply escalate. And the sort of situation, the sort of dynamic I've just described, is probably the underlying presenting trigger or cause of about 99% of conflict. Often the real issues, which are personal, are just not acknowledged. And the sad thing is that what will be destructive in it will be destructive.
Okay, so we want to now just think a little bit about what happens in our brain, really, and our body when we're in the middle of conflict. And a lot of this is very similar to what happens when we're in a traumatic relationship. But we're going to talk about it here in terms of conflict. So we're not able to give you any diagrams. So I want you to imagine that this is your brain. My fist and my wrist are your brain, okay? So if you imagine that this is the front of your brain, that's often called the frontal lobes or the frontal cortex. And that's where we do our rational, reasonable thinking process. It's where we do our problem solving. It's hopefully where you're all functioning at this moment in time, that we're not scaring you or frightening you, but you're all just engaging your normal thinking brain. You're reacting in a calm, in a logical kind of way, really. Behind that, if you imagine that this is kind of, I don't know, probably about here on my head, the middle bit of the brain, is what's called the limbic system. And it's sometimes known as our reactive brain or our non-verbal brain. This is the bit that comes into play in conflict situations. You've probably all heard of the term sort of fight or flight. There's also another bit that's called freeze or submit. And they're reactions of our brain when we feel under threat, when we feel that danger is at hand. And that's the bit that starts to kick into gear in conflict situations. And it sends a message to the back bit of our brain, our instinctual brain, to say, prepare, you're under threat, you need to do something. And that could be that you need to run, it could be that you need to fight. And it's where all those things that happen instinctively without us even thinking about it. If you think when you've been in a conflict situation, what starts to happen? It may be that your breathing increases, your pulse rate increases. It may be that you start to get tension in your muscles, in your stomach. And that's all because the body is preparing for fight and flight. So that's kind of our natural reaction. But as long as we stay in conflict in the limbic system, in the fight and flight part of the brain, it's not about logic or rational argument or discussion anymore. It's about winning or escaping. It's about friend or foe thinking. And what can happen is that we can actually store memories of previous conflicts, of previous situations where we felt threatened. And they're kind of stored in that part of the brain, the limbic system, without a date stamp to them. And so when another conflict occurs, may not be serious even, but it triggers a reaction, and it triggers the reaction, and what will come back can be all the feelings, all the reactions, all the emotions of previous conflicts. And so we can just escalate and escalate. And if you think about where Chris was just saying about sort of transference, so all of my limbic system, my fight and flight is triggering off, and then that triggers it off in Chris, and then that triggers it back, and we end up, it just escalates and escalates until a place where we can't actually think logically anymore, where our frontal lobes, the thinking part of our brain, has ceased to work. And that can be very serious in the consequences of what happens to us, and how we react, and how conflicts in relationships get out of control almost. So when we're looking at how do we manage conflict, there's that bit of how do we manage that explosion, and how do we then work through the issues after the explosion. The how do we manage the explosion is all about how do we get the frontal lobes back into gear. How do I start using this bit of my brain rather than this bit? And it's often said that you get about 90 seconds to do that, to actually kick those frontal lobes into gear again. And a lot of it's about actually just calming the body and calming the brain. There's been a lot of research over the last 10, 15 years about how much our bodies and brains are connected, and how much we can use our bodies to calm our brains and our brains to calm our bodies. So if we find ourselves in a conflict situation where it seems out of all proportion, where we're reacting in a fight-flight situation, there's lots of practical things we can do. Learn to breathe more deeply and slowly. Say to the person that you're in conflict with, can I just take a minute or two to step away? I will come back, and I'm not ignoring what's going on, but I just need to step away. You may be able to count backwards from 10 very slowly, and it just calms the brain. It kicks back into gear the thinking part of the brain. Doing some calm physical movement, standing up, sitting down, having a drink of water, just walking around the room slowly and calmly, tensing and untensing muscles. All of those things make a physical change, so they physically change our reaction, but they also bring our brain back into calmness and kick back into gear the logical parts of our brain. If we feel that we're in a place where we may often be in conflict or stress, we may want to have some kind of what's called a grounding object in our pocket, something we can touch that gives us some sense of security, some sense of inner strength. People have things like holding crosses or a stone, something like that we hold. Or we may just need to focus on an object in the room that's calming, that's concrete, just to calm us down. And also it's about saying you're not back in the situation of the past where conflict was terrible. You're in the current moment, and you're here, and it's safe. So that's kind of how do we get back into logical brain? How do we get through those first 90 seconds? But it's no good just doing that. If we just do that, then the next time the conflict happens, we'll be back into an escalated brain situation again. We need to then think, what do we do after the first 90 seconds? And so some things that we might need to reflect upon. We need to own and understand our own reactions and our own anger. Who are we angry with? What is it precisely that we're angry about? What is it about someone's behaviour? So that's thinking back to what Chris was saying earlier. It's differentiating between the past and the present. It's not allowing what's happening in the present to be influenced by the past. It's working out, was my reaction really about the current issue? Or was it actually influenced a lot by what's happened to me in the past? And how can I separate those two things? Try to evaluate how important really is the issue that I think I'm in the conflict with. Or is it that it's being escalated because of other things? Am I seeking a solution, or am I seeking power? Or am I just trying to feel that I'm not completely powerless? And then reflect upon, how do I actually handle conflict? How do I actually react and handle conflict? And I'm going to hand over to Chris for that bit.
Try to explain with some props, pictures, about the different reactions and strategies, if that's the right word, that we take in conflict situations. And there are many reasons why we behave like this. It's partly our personalities, partly some hurts and damage of the past, maybe. Some of them are healthy, some of them are not so healthy. But just some ideas of what we can be like. Now, just a couple of aims in dealing with trying to get through conflict and difference and disagreement healthily is two things. Is about being assertive, which is not the same as being aggressive. Assertive is actually just genuinely making your point, being who you are, not denying yourself. But if it's healthy assertiveness, you hopefully will be cooperative with it at some point so that the other person's viewpoint comes in. I'm going to start with a shark. Here we are, a shark. Now, this shark has got lots of horrible looking teeth. Now, the shark can be either aggressive or assertive, depending on the particular breed of shark we're dealing with. But during the course of a discussion or a debate, what they will see as discussion, but some other people will see as an argument or a conflict, will come over as very uncooperative, not listening. And there are two emphases in dealing with conflict. One is the goals of what we're trying to achieve in whatever we're discussing, and the other are relationships and what value we put on either. Now, with the shark, there's a very high emphasis on achieving personal goals, getting the job done, and generally little concern directly for those relationships. It's about playing to win. Can come over as forceful, direct, set out to get others to accept their viewpoint. Now, that can be healthy or unhealthy. We need ideas, people. Now, if it's an aggressive shark, they either do not care what others think about them, or it comes over that way. And it may be this is an attempt to compensate, overcompensate very unhealthily for perhaps a lack of self-esteem, perhaps a lack of secure sense of self. You've got to prove something. It's about power, and obviously it's quite abusive. The other type of shark is, if you've done management and some of the management roles and things, leadership roles is sometimes called planters and shapers. Planting and shaping, which is ideas. They'll go enthusiastically blasting in, playing to win, arguing their cause, and then be horrified at the effect they appear to have had on others. Later on, they may feel bad about unwittingly hurting people's feelings and perhaps be quite shocked at the effect on others because it's not what they've meant to do. Not very good either way. Sharks are not very good at coping with silent or passive responses. But the healthier or the more natural form of sharks sometimes are prepared to give others time to think about things. If time is defined, and it may well need that some time afterwards, but that's the shark. I know several very, very good counsellors who are natural sharks in debates, but that is of the second variety. The turtle, and I'll let you into a secret. We do not have, my mother-in-law has a tortoise that was given to us. Sue used to have a tortoise for life and is a bit fascinated by tortoises and things, and actually did a paper on the symbol of the tortoise in the psychotherapy course. Now, the turtle, is unassertive and uncooperative, and that's the point. There is complete neglect of both the goals and the relationships. The overwhelming priority of the turtle is to avoid conflict at all costs, and there may be good reason for doing that from the past. By withdrawing, needs to have time to think things through on their own. And the instincts are to persevere, to exercise extreme caution, and to eliminate and avoid risk. Maybe there's something to be encouraged to be listened to further down the line. Okay, now somebody we all like, the teddy bear. There we are, teddy bear. Cooperative. This is a cooperative animal, among us, but unassertive. These teddy bears prioritise relationships, but little attention to the goals in whatever is going on, including their own. Another conflict avoidant character, but by smoothing over the rough edges. Now, the advantage in the immediate situation can bring a calm atmosphere, but the danger is because they're basically appeasers. And really, it's just dealing with the immediates. They may be very good at this. Often cause the issues to remain unresolved and just simply postpone some inevitable conflict further down the line. We now pass to two other animals who are both assertive and cooperative, which we said was the ideal, but different, and one may be more useful than the other in resolving conflict. First of all, the owl, the wise owl. Why do we think they're wise? Relationships and goals both have a high priority. Super. But the owl needs to have both fulfilled to be content or happy in the situation for themselves. Good thing, seek a win-win situation for everybody. And the owl works by identifying and confronting what they see as the real issues. A lot of other people aren't ready to deal with them sometimes. And a slight danger perhaps of toppling into perfectionism. But the owl is of value, but maybe will fall short of their own expectations of what they can achieve. But I'm not knocking the owls. And finally, what we're saying is the middle way, the fox. The owl is an idealist. Some types of personality in the minority are idealistic characters. Most people are pragmatists, and the fox is the ultimate effective pragmatist. The middle way in terms of goals and relationships. They are middling but do value both goals and relationships, and they can be both assertive and cooperative levels. Genuine negotiators, not appeasers, not avoiders, and not even idealistic sort of purifiers, if you like, but prepared to trade, not dismiss, but trade their own agenda for mutually acceptable outcomes, and really value pragmatic, effective solutions rather than ideals. Now, I think there's a place, obviously, for owls and foxes. There's a place for the healthy shark, and there may be times for the other two. Types have their use. It's helpful for us to identify who perhaps we're most like. I'm going to hand over to Sue now. He's going to talk about forms of dealing with confrontations and conflict, which can perhaps affect a solution, or at least a better situation than it could be.
So you might like to thought about whether you're an owl or a fox or a turtle, and also think about how if someone else in your family is a totally different type of character, how that then works in a conflict, because you will be trying to resolve it and work at it in an entirely different way from each other. And we're not telling any of you to change, but it's about understanding what that can do to each other in a conflict. I just want to talk for a minute about something called caring confrontation. And often we think of those as two entirely different things. If you're a caring person, then you're a bit like a teddy bear. You can't do the confrontation. And if you're a confrontational person, you're a bit like a shark, and you can't do the caring. But actually, the two go together. And visually, a way of thinking about it is about holding out your left and your right hand to represent caring and confrontation. And if you're in a situation where you're trying to talk through an issue, trying to talk through something that's called conflict, you might actually want to visualize it like that. So just for examples, the caring part of me might say to someone else, I want to get our relationship right. The confronting hand might say, but there are some deep issues between us. It's not being aggressive, but it's not hiding what's going on. I want to give you a chance to express your side of the debate, the discussion, but I want you to clearly hear my side too. I'll try my best to understand your viewpoint, the points that you're making, but I want you to try to understand mine too. I'll try not to manipulate you, not to put pressure on you, not to try to distort or exasperate the differences between us. But I want you to hear and to do the same for me, so that you can hear my clear viewpoint, that I don't feel pressured, that I can express my views honestly. I'll try to stay with the discussion until we've worked through it to a place where we can come to some agreement. But I want you to do the same, to be part of the agreement, to talk through and to stay with the discussion. And so it's all about trying to get that balance, trying to be caring, but in caring, not hiding the issues, being able to confront them in a safe way. Whenever we do this, we need to do it in that present state. Just thinking back to when Chris was talking about transference and the vicar and Jonathan, they weren't going to get into this care confronting situation as long as they were reacting from the past. The only way that you can do caring confrontation is to do it acting in the present moment. And so sometimes we might have to step back and think, am I acting in the present moment or am I acting in the past? And actually kind of physically try to engage our brains into the present moment. So after those first 90 seconds that we talked about and getting our brain just kind of down from the escalated place, what do? We've talked about our coping strategies, how we cope with conflict. We've talked about care confronting and just a few more ideas. We need to set aside times for discussion, not wait until the conflict rises again and then we're back into fight and flight. We need to choose to have times for discussion, not to avoid them. And in those discussions, we need to try to be as real as we can be. We need to try perhaps to, thinking back to the start of the seminar, think about how we function, our differences. What are our expectations of each other? How do we communicate? What are the communication methods that work for each of us? And how do we deal with conflict? What What are the roles that we take on in conflict? We often talk in church about forgiveness, but we need to be very real about forgiveness. It's very hard. It takes time. It has to be worked at. And it's often a choice. We often talk to people in counselling about, I sometimes one day might want to think about, I might be able to forgive. And that can be as much as you can get to at any point in time. But forgiveness is certainly not about saying it didn't matter. And it's certainly not about saying that behaviour may not have to be addressed. In the current situation that we're all living in, we might need to think about some very practical things. What time and space do individuals in our family need? Does each of us need somewhere where we know that we can, even for a short space of time, be alone and uninterrupted? We might need to think about, what are our boundaries? The times of the day when certain rooms are available for certain people in the family, when the computer's available for certain people in the family, when we need not to have other noise in other rooms. What times of the day do each of us work better? We might need to schedule our day around those sorts of things. We might need to think about how and when do we actually need a break from each other. Perhaps don't always take your family exercise together. Perhaps one or two of you might be okay together, or you might need to do it individually. But we might need to actually have physical space from each other. And think about how you manage your own stress. What helps you to relax? Relaxation exercises, activities. How are you taking care of yourself physically and mentally? Because if we don't take care of ourselves physically and mentally, our stress levels rise and we're much more likely to have conflict in our relationships. And we may also want to think about, do we as individuals need to have someone outside of the family, outside of the home, that we can just talk to? And we know that we can't do that physically, but we can do it perhaps via telephone or online or something. Someone that we can just share how we're feeling in a safe place and that's not going to cause conflict within our family situation.
I'd like to finish with a prayer. This has been a very practical seminar, just dealing with some basic points and some basic things to help us perhaps listen to each other better, understand each other a bit better. We haven't gone into detail, we haven't had time, how our different temperaments can react, but there are things you can look at on that. But in this time of excess stress on society, the one fear is that some of our relationships won't actually survive, which would be tragic. And it may be for a time we just do survive what's happening now, just to get through it. And then maybe other problems surface further down the road. So these are things to consider. But I'd just like to finish in a prayer. It's not a quick fix prayer. It's not a silly prayer. It's not a I've seen done sort of put your problems in your hand and Holy Spirit will blow them away. Well, that would be lovely. But that's not how the reality of life is. It's an ongoing prayer for each of us to live with ourselves and God and our relationships. And it's a prayer for each one of us that we will be there at the other side of this and can eventually get through and learn to grow beyond this time of crisis. Dear Lord, help us to live at peace with you, at peace with ourselves, and so be able healthily to live at peace with others. Give all of us towards each other grace in our relationships. Shine your love in the relationships that surround us, so that they may grow rather than wither. Give us patience and understanding to bear disagreements, because we will have them, and the generosity to share our joys, and particularly to all of us to find healthy ways to deal with our own stresses and anxieties and excessive senses of loss or fears during this present crisis. In the name of Jesus, Amen.
We'd like to thank you for joining with us for this seminar. We hope that you found it useful and some helpful things that you can take away from it. Hopefully, the notes from the seminar and perhaps some resources that may be of help, we will be able to make available on the Spring Harvest website. But if not, and also, as we said at the start, I'm the chair of the Association of Christian Counsellors, and we will certainly make notes from this seminar and resources available on ACC's website. And if you'd like to go to that, it's www.acc-uk.org, and you should be able to find seminar notes and some resources for you on that website, in addition to Spring Harvests. We hope that you enjoy all of the rest of Spring Harvest at Home's resources, all the other seminars and worship and teaching, and we thank you for joining us at this time. Thank you. Bye-bye.